Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses, excuse me, and riding from the inside out. I am a very horse froggy, excuse me, I am a horse and froggy Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer. And back with me is my good friend Deb Romero, certified Alexander Technique instructor. And for you guys listening on podcast channels or even on Facebook, I'm sorry, but the last 2 months, the scheduling just got really
It
chaotic.
did,
So
didn't it?
I think we're a little bit behind on our weekly
Mhm.
episodes, but bear with us, should get better. I have lots of interesting guests on the schedule coming up. But today's topic came up from a YouTube comment
Oh,
on the training scales. Hang on, let me take a sip.
good idea.
Sorry. I thought I had cleared my throat and it just wasn't working as soon as I hit record. Sorry about that, you guys. So the the training scales or the German training scales or the training scales of dressage or the training pyramid, it all refers to the same thing. And it is sort of, as dressage riders, the holy grail of training. So I wanted to sort of look at it, and Deb, you weren't as familiar with it, so you've done your little bit of
I did a
looking it
little bit
up
of research around
online.
it, yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah.
And so the first thing I want to point out is that the training pyramid or the training scales, which in the United States has come to mean dressage training.
Mm.
And I just want to point out it's the German classical method of training. It is specifically the German Federation, right? And I think the reason it has become so prevalent, especially in the US, is because the German dressage team and even the German jumping team has won more gold medals
Mm.
than almost any other country. So,
Hmm.
of course, Americans jump on board and we want to adopt the German method because that's who's winning. And
Interesting.
but there are in Europe where the classical schools of horse training actually developed and originally developed during the Renaissance era into the Baroque era of actually training horses to a higher level. And dressage itself was the training methodology to develop what they call the high school movements, which are the airs above the ground, and what
Mm.
you can still see performed at the Spanish School of Riding in Vienna, Austria. So there is a traditional Spanish classical school of training horses, a different one that's Portuguese, a different one that's German, and even in Austria, which is a Germanic country, the Spanish School of Riding is their premier classical training. In France, it's the Cadenois. And I think the Fulmer School of Riding in England was their sort of classical school, although they have the British Horse Society as well. And then there's the Swedish, and then there's a lot of different
Where's the
classical
American one?
schools. You don't really have an American one. So the American one is a smorgasbord
I guess.
of different European classical schools that have been around for hundreds of years. And so in America, we've almost delineated what we now call competitive dressage, which is more based
Interesting.
on the Germanic method of training, versus what we call classical dressage, which is based more on the Spanish, Portuguese methods of classical training. And it's really just every country had its own school, except the US doesn't, right? So the training pyramid or the training scales came out of the German tradition of classical training, but has become the holy grail of modern
Uh-oh.
dressage riders.
Uh-oh.
And while I agree with it and highly respect the classical schools of horse training
Mhm.
in all the different European countries, the German training scales is so general that I think we have to look at what that means and what the words can mean, because basically it's a pyramid shape is how it's presented. And the base of the pyramid, which should be the biggest part of the training, starts with rhythm. So it goes upwards towards the point of the pyramid or in order. Rhythm, then suppleness, then contact, then impulsion, and then straightness. And I even saw a couple of dressage websites had above straightness was another layer that they were calling collection. I
I
don't
saw
know
that too.
how traditional that is, but it's basically, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 5 elements, maybe 6 if we added collection to the pyramid. And so those are pretty general terms. And as horse geeks, we need to like go in and go, well, what does that mean? What does that
know.
word mean?
That's what
Right?
I kept looking at different sites and like, why is there no explanation of what that means?
Well, and
And
I
I
found a
even did
lot of
some videos.
explanations. Yeah, I found a lot of explanations of what that meant and what it meant on a practical level. And I jotted down the ones I came across most often that are
Okay.
really related to modern competitive dressage perceptions. But the conversation I keep having with people about the training scales or the training pyramids is I always say, are we talking internal or are we talking external?
Wow, that's huge.
And nobody knows what I mean when I say that.
No, they don't because they see the external result. Yeah, this makes sense. Yeah. They see
And
the external result, but how are they achieving it?
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's our whole deal on this podcast is looking at things from the inside out.
Yeah.
How does the body actually work? How does the mind actually work? And we can take the entire pyramid and we can look at it through the lens of internal mechanical function, balance, forces of motion, how, how balanced is the horse's mind or emotional state? Or are they doing this while they're in fear? Are they doing this
Hmm.
because they're becoming athletic and enjoy the work? So there's a lot of lenses or perspectives that we can look at this through. And maybe the whole point of keeping it a single word was for people to discover what that means over time.
Maybe. Yeah.
So, and I want to kind of talk about this too. I'm not bashing dressage riders. Like my greatest respect for people who enter dressage as a study or a system of riding and training their horse, I find are some of the most well-educated riders. They read
Yeah.
incessantly. They want to understand their horse. They want to know, how do I improve the movement? Because the whole premise behind dressage is to gymnasticize the horse for any sport, to
Right.
actually change how the horse moves and enhance the movement and the athletic abilities of the horse. And so dressage riders obsessively study and read
Obsessively.
more than any other sort of
And practice.
and practice. And
Yes.
I really admire that. But what I see sometimes is that that can almost hinder
Mhm.
riders because with that
Yeah.
mental curiosity, I think I see a lot of dressage riders want to fall into what are the rules? How do you do this? What are the aids? What are the rules? How
Yeah,
do you
and I
how do you
agree.
do it?
Yeah. The structure, they want it to be very structured and with that sometimes comes contraction and locking and you know.
Or not being able to adapt
Yeah.
to the living, breathing, thinking, emotional
Hmm.
creature that is our horse. And it's not like I still always hear this sort of inside leg to outside rein to, engage the abdominals, and that's how you lift the back, and you need speed and energy. And all of those things are not entirely untrue, but bodies are not that simple. It,
No.
it's it's not programmable. It's like saying if we could teach every single child how to ride a bike the exact same way using the exact same aids or condition
Hmm.
response, then every kid would learn to ride a bike in a certain period of time. And
That
I go,
reminds me, yeah, it kind of goes back to what we studied the DART procedures, which is exploring how you as a human evolved. Like when you lay on your stomach and go to turn over, do you lift a shoulder first? Do you lift a hip first? Every body achieves vertical differently.
yeah, and there's no rules.
There's no rules, and you just have to explore, well, how did I do that one? Because I thought, because I'm left-handed, that when I went to crawl, you would think I would engage my left side first. I don't.
Mm.
So, and yeah, just all that way of thinking and moving, it's so individual.
Yeah, and I go bodies and minds, whether we're
Hmm.
talking horse or rider, are incredibly complex and unpredictable because there's a gazillion ways that any unique horse sort of learns to adjust and manage to find some semblance of stability when they first learn to carry a rider.
Hmm.
And I go, but how two horses do that internally, and that's
Internally, yeah.
and that specific coordination can be vastly different from horse to horse, even within the same breed, even within the same training program or the
Hmm.
same barn. I go, it's way too individual to predict.
And I think that's where I see layers of challenge, because it's not A plus B equals C for every horse and rider.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we circle back to the sort of training pyramid or the training scales, I look at the qualities of movement that we're
Mm.
trying to achieve. I agree with those: rhythm, suppleness, contact, impulsion, straightness. Let's just stay with those. I think they're the most traditional.
Yeah, that's a lot.
But it's sort of the way it's mapped out is that the order of achievement is important because,
Mm.
especially in the pyramid model, the base of all the work is rhythm. But I go, when I'm actually working with horses on their balance, a lot of times I need straightness internally
Mhm.
in order to find the rhythm.
I agree.
So if I put straightness at the very top of the pyramid, it's not on my radar with a green horse. And so I go, that's, straightness, maybe maintaining the three-dimensional coordination of balance on a very precise path of travel, that I would put at the top of my training pyramid. But the internal straightness, I'm going to put, to me, it's a fundamental quality
Yeah.
internally
Hmm.
that helps a horse find rhythm or find suppleness.
That's the same with people. I was talking to a rider about this gripping with the hands, and I said, if you don't have your own internal straightness through your head, neck, back, and pelvis, you're going to grip with your legs and your hands.
You have to.
Yeah, I said, until you organize the internal straightness, the exterior is going to manage it instead of the inside.
Right. And we've had
Yeah.
this discussion, I think, on past podcasts about the axial skeleton of the body,
Hmm.
whether it's horse or rider. The axial skeleton is going to involve the skull, the spine, the rib cage, and I always include the pelvis, even
Yeah.
though
They
science,
don't anatomically, it's not included language wise,
right, but I always
in
stick it in
anatomy, but
there.
yeah, but it's
And
part of the spine.
if that axis of the body is not stable skeletally, right? And it's a moving coordination. So that stability is always being challenged and has to restabilize during motion. But if that primary axis of the body, whether it's the horse or the rider,
Hmm.
is unstable, then there's no way you're going to get suppleness and the limbs have to take over the role of stabilizing the body, or we would fail to function, which means the rider would
It's the
fall
same.
off.
Yep. Yep. It's the same in horse and rider. I think we both believe that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So
We agree on that.
you can't tell a rider to quit gripping with the legs or to
Right.
quit gripping the reins if the axial skeleton is not stable. The body has to be stable somewhere.
Hmm.
So it's
And it
either,
might not, it might even be fear that comes up. It might be an emotional thing instead of well, the tensing comes in anyway, but the central nervous system is going to send a response. Hey, we're not stable here. You
right.
better do something about it or I
It-
will.
yeah. And all of this is unconscious.
Exactly.
It's just the body's automatic response to take care of us.
Hmm.
So when we focus on stabilizing the midline, which is part of internal straightness, if that's at the top of our training pyramid, we might be missing the key to muscular suppleness.
I agree. Same thing in in a human.
Right. And then even the contact, like contact, they have as number 3 on the
Wow.
list, but impulsion comes after contact. And I go, I never get a rein contact until the horse can control how their internal body weight is organized during motion, which requires impulsion,
Right.
right? So if the horse is not engaged enough through the hindquarters to utilize the braking mechanism of the back and the hindquarters, then they can't control their own body weight, which means with every stride that they push forward, they literally push their own body weight onto their front end.
Front end. Yeah.
And impulsion to me means that balance between pushing and resisting the body weight going
The
forward.
forces. Yeah.
So it's a controlled forward thrust coming from behind, right? And if I don't have that, then it's very difficult to have a rein contact because until I have that, the horse is constantly altering the use of the head and neck in order to find stability. So if I restrict the head and neck, thinking I need a contact before I achieve internal impulsion, then it's the horse is going to have to overcurl the neck, drop the
Hmm.
pole, lean on the bit, get behind the bit, and rein contact is going to be challenging, ugly, and elusive until the horse has some control over their own internal body weight during motion.
I agree. And I think that word contact you know, I think there's healthy contact and non-healthy contact. And like you said, it's the way you're going about it that matters.
Well, to me, contact means touch, connection.
Okay.
Contact doesn't mean a response to resistance. So if we hold
Hmm.
hands with another human, we have a contact.
Right.
If I
Right.
pull my friend's hand to go somewhere, that's no longer a contact, that's a direction.
That's good to know the difference. Yeah. Yeah.
I, I mean, and there we go. There's the word contact, but everybody has a different view of what that word means,
Exactly.
right? And also, even if we come back to impulsion, which is just below straightness. So internally, I almost have to reverse the order of
I
this
was thinking
pyramid
the same thing. I was like, to flip it around.
because I have to straighten and stabilize the axial skeleton in order to get suppleness, right? I have to get suppleness before I can get true engagement, which is what gives me impulsion. And it's the impulsion and the straightness that creates the rhythm, which is a balance
Hmm.
between braking and pushing, or the balance between the forward energy and the self control over the forward energy. Same
Right.
thing. And those things then give me a contact, which means I can touch my horse through the reins without influencing the position of the head and neck. I can
And for the,
touch my
yeah,
horse.
for the human to be able to have that touch, they have to be internally straight,
Engaged or
engaged.
have impulse. Like to
Yeah,
me, the impulsion of the rider is that we maintain the integrity of our vertical axial skeleton no matter how the horse moves.
right.
So, in other words, if the horse isn't rhythmic, that movement between too slow, too fast, or altering speeds is going to keep pitching the rider forward and
Mhm.
back, just like the accelerator and the brakes in our car.
Right.
And so, if we are thrown out of balance by that, if we lean back against it,
Hmm.
or we get tossed forward with every
Hmm.
transition, then there's no way our horse can find stability, much less rhythm or suppleness.
Yeah, and as we've talked, it's just pure physics. I mean,
Yeah, it's
it's
physics.
just pure physics. It's
So
too,
let's sort of take our internal perspective and go, what do these words mean? So when I say the
Mhm.
word rhythm, which is the bottom of the training scale, what does rhythm mean to you?
I always think of rhythm as a beat.
Hmm.
Yeah, a continuous rhythmic beat. And most of the things that I saw were always at the trot, which I found very interesting. I didn't see very many applications at the walk.
Oh yeah.
Um, so that was interesting to me. But the rhythm is like hearing all the four hoof beats at a walk in a cyclic pattern.
Yeah. And what I did with each thing was I go, what's the dictionary description?
Yeah.
What is the definition of the word? And rhythm is cadence,
Mhm.
regularity, right? And that never in the definition does it say slow or fast. It's a regularity of the footfall patterns. So in the walk, there's 4 beats.
Mhm.
In the trot, there's 2 beats. And in the canter, there's 3 beats. But what rhythm means is a regularity to the beats. So the tempo, right?
That's what I would say. I didn't, unfortunately, in my limited amount of research, did not see that occur. The videos I watched, everybody was, you had to either speed up or slow down.
Which is not untrue. If you have a horse that
Yeah,
rushes, then the tempo may be quick, but if they're
right,
going faster and faster and faster, it lacks regularity.
right,
So you might have to bring them back a little bit. If the horse is slow, is it going slower, 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 or is it just a slow
right.
tempo?
That's a good question.
Right? So you can have a
Yeah.
quick tempo or a slow tempo, but it's the regularity that defines the rhythm. And when I looked up on some dressage websites, almost all of the descriptions said with energy. And
Interesting.
what I see play out, because I really can't entirely disagree with it, I would more carefully say that rhythm is the balance between self-propelled and self-controlled. And
So it's like self-carriage. Is that what you're talking about? Like a,
well, that would mean that the horse has self-carriage in rhythm if it's
yeah,
self-propelled and
right.
self-controlled. But the playing out of it, and when I work with dressage riders in rehab, one of the things they can't hardly stand to watch is a slow rhythm, whether it's the walk, the trot, or the canter, because they've associated rhythm equals energetically forward, which in most people's mind, energy equals speed. And I go, no,
Right,
energy doesn't equal speed,
right.
right? And rhythm,
That's what I saw too. It was always more forward, more forward. Yeah.
right? And if you break down even just the swing of the hind legs, right? For every swing, when the hoof comes forward towards the center of the horse's body and hits the ground, that begins the breaking phase of the stride, which is the more engaged position of the pelvis, placing the hind leg deeper towards the center of the body. But that's not the pushing phase, it's the breaking
Breaking.
phase. So then the leg joints flex because the body is resisting its own weight in forward motion. So it's just like us. If we walk down a hill, right? The fact that we don't fall on our face while we're walking down a hill is because we're using the braking phase of our leg strides and the braking use of the back muscles and our uh, core muscles. So rhythm is that balance between braking and pushing. So
Yeah,
the forward placement of the horse's hind leg should resist the acceleration force, not increase it. And most people think the deeper the horse steps, the more pushing power you get. And I go, well, if they resist their body weight correctly
and
during the
not fall
braking
forward.
phase, then they do have more power in the thrust. So once the hind hoof lands, it breaks until it hits until the joints go into extension, which is called peak vertical. And in that peak vertical is where the stride transitions into the pushing phase or the acceleration. So from peak vertical, the hoof begins to push back off the ground and the leg goes out, the pelvis rotates backwards, the hind leg goes out behind the torso to generate the forward thrust of motion, right? Then the hoof leaves the ground, swings forward under the body, and the braking phase begins again. And those are just, look it up. Those are just the
It's basic.
phases. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
very
it's just
basic
basic.
mechanics. And it's just the swing of the hind leg phase. So what I see, the problem I see with rhythm equaling more speed in people's mind is that once the pushing phase exceeds the capacity of the braking phase, or the pushing phase of the stride is longer in length than the braking phase of the stride, the horse cannot control their own body weight in motion. So they're going to fall forward the faster they go.
Mhm.
And it disengages the pelvis because if the pushing phase exceeds the braking phase, the pelvis never has time to rotate forward. And so you get you get kind of a fixed pattern of the pelvis rotating backwards more often than forward, and the leg placement being more often in the extended phase of the leg joints, with the leg behind the torso rather than under the torso. So when I see with energy, I'm like, well, how much energy? What do you mean
And
by
where's
energy?
it going? Where
Right, right. Because
that's
energy is just energy. It has nothing
right,
to do with speed,
right.
right?
Yeah,
So a lethargic horse that lacks energy, yes, the horse is going to be slow, but more importantly, they're also not actively braking. They're just taking their foot off the gas pedal and sort of reducing both pushing and braking power out of the hind limbs, hindquarter, and back. So I agree that the horse needs energy with an active brake and an active thrust, but that has zero to do with the miles per hour that the horse moves.
exactly.
Zero. So you can have a very slow tempo and you can have small strides, but the equality between the braking and pushing distance or phase of
Mhm.
each stride has to be equal in order to have rhythm.
What's interesting about that to me is, and I haven't been to an inspection in a long time, but when my horses were young and had to go through Oldenburg and Hanoverian inspections, they want to see
Fast
high energy,
speeds,
fast speed, high energy,
long strides.
the horse kind of Yeah. So I mean, it goes way back to that.
Well, and it's not, I don't disagree with that in the competitive or the grading system, but it's not training.
Right.
So if that's what you're practicing at home, if that's what you're pushing the young horse into to win the show, what you're doing is creating patterns of dysfunction
Totally agree with that.
in order to get it to look right rather than be right
Be right on the inside.
on the
Hmm.
inside. And so that pattern, I think it's the main reason that in the US in dressage competition, the emphasis is on this rhythm, suppleness, contact, and beginning impulsion, which has come to mean energetically forward, which has come to mean fast speeds and long strides. And when we train that way, or we're rewarding that up through dressage, like third level, that horse loses the athletic agility required to do fourth level and higher because the emphasis is on pushing. The braking mechanism is literally
Right.
weakened. And so you have no agility to do the lead changes or the more, complicated lateral work. So our pirouettes and our piafs suck because
It,
the whole emphasis has been on pushing, and you need the
hmm.
braking capacity really
Right.
strong to increase vertical force and to do maneuvers that require agility. Same thing
Right.
with cow working or um, upper levels of stadium jumping. Those endeavors require tight turns, high jumps, shifts back and forth. All of that requires agility. And so if all we ever want to see are big, long, fast strides, we decrease our horse's capacity to be agile.
Yeah.
Anything you
Yeah.
want to add to rhythm?
Nope.
Then I'm going to let you take it away on suppleness because this is the same with human bodies as
Defines
horse bodies. So suppleness,
suppleness to me means availability. That everything I always ask myself when I'm riding, when I get on, are all my joints open and available? Is everything available to me? If I needed to do something, is it available? Or am I tensing somewhere? Am I internally straight? If I'm not, then I'm gripping somewhere. I'm going to find a place that's gripping.
I love that. And that kind of goes hand in hand with agility. It's that
Yeah.
availability.
It's just availability, like those agility dogs.
Yeah, because you're changing, you're constantly changing
You're being
direction.
asked to adapt speed, directions, timing. And if you don't have internal straightness, that's not available to you.
Yeah, and I love that you sort of brought in, are all my joints available? Is my
Hmm.
skeleton available to adjust to whatever the horse is throwing at me or the work we're doing? Because I think too, suppleness has come to mean a muscular quality. End of story. And
Hmm.
I go, we can lock joints as well as over tighten muscles.
Hmm.
And I think suppleness has also, let's see, the definition I came across most was elasticity, which is sort of a muscle quality.
Mm.
But I I think what that has translated to in our modern dressage is your horse needs more massage. Your horse, did I say dressage or massage? Anyways, in modern dressage, it's like your horse needs the massage therapist to supple the muscles, or your horse needs to work in long and low in order so that posture supples the muscles, or
Mm.
you have to like go
Mm.
over ground poles or do these other things that cause the muscles to release contraction. And when you and
Interesting.
I, like when you and I have talked about the tensegrity model of a body, I go, it's just like if the axial skeleton isn't stable and straight, then you can't release the tension out of the limbs.
Mm-mm. It's
And
biomechanically not going to happen.
yeah, and I look at the body
It's
and
just
I
that
go,
simple.
suppleness muscularly, and even the suppleness or availability of the joints depends on the stability of the skeletal coordination.
Mhm.
So if the skeleton, particularly the axial skeleton, is not coordinating in a stable way during motion, no matter what you do, you can't release overly tight muscles.
No,
They're there
something
for
is
a
going to be
reason.
too tight and something too loose.
Yes,
There's not going to be the balance of availability.
right. And if you guys listening want to just Google a tensegrity model, you can, the tensegrity model is just a model of how bodies work or how a structure that isn't sort of, four pillars and a roof,
Mhm.
how it organizes. And the compression elements, which in some models are just wooden sticks or dowels, in the body, it's the bones. And what in a tensegrity model, the rubber bands or the stretchy part in a
Mhm.
body are all the soft tissues, which is not just muscle, but
No,
tendon,
it's not.
ligament, and fascia.
And cartilage too is considered a soft tissue.
Yeah. So that interplay between hard and soft tissues in the body,
Mhm.
if the hard tissues are not stable and in a constant adjusting relationship with gravity, then the soft tissues have to kick in or we would fall over or fall off
Mhm.
of our horse. So chronic muscle tightness always indicates a lack of stability through the skeletal coordination. So if you release that tightness manually, you suddenly might not have any stability, which
Yeah, I've
will,
seen some horses completely fall apart emotionally after a massage or a chiropractic adjustment.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or I've seen a lot of people manipulate the horse into the posture of long and low, thinking that if you get the neck long and the head down, that posture creates a stretch through the back muscles. And I go, it can actually have the effect, if we're manipulating it, it can have the effect of overly tightening the
Yeah.
back and the hindquarter muscles. Because if the skeleton is not stable and we put our horse in that posture through cues, aids, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, doesn't matter. It's not that posture that creates the stretch. So putting the horse in that posture manually can actually create more tightening of the muscles than suppleness.
You know what
Have
I
the
was just thinking of?
absolute reverse effect.
I was just thinking of at my age if somebody tried to push me into doing the splits. Oh my gosh.
No, I had this amazing client one time when I was talking about this very thing. She like nodded her head, put her hand up and went, she actually had a double hip replacement from forcing her body into different yoga positions,
Whoa.
thinking that the more supple she became in her muscles, the healthier she would be.
Wow.
And it actually destroyed her hip joints from kind of going through the pain and forcing her body to do the splits. And it
Hmm.
blew out her hip joints. She had two hip replacements.
Interesting.
And she was maybe in her 40s,
Wow.
not an old person. And that's what we can do to the horses is actually create damage to the joint, tendon, ligament, or even the muscle itself by trying to artificially create the posture we
Get
want
there.
to
Hmm.
see. It doesn't create the stretch, right? So to
Right.
me, a horse falling into the posture of long and low during motion is a dynamic result of stabilizing the midline, right?
Hmm.
Stabilizing the axial skeleton. Once the axial skeleton is stable, then all of those patterns of chronic tightness and tension through the top line muscles, it just starts to let go because the body is stable somewhere else. So the neck lengthening is a dynamic and spontaneous result of stabilizing the axial skeleton. And then the horse falls into long and low because they lack the engagement of the hindquarter
Right.
or the flexion of the spine. So I go, it's not, when it's dynamic, I don't worry about it, but I would never artificially. And there are, oh my God, so many training devices that are trying to create a frame, long or short. Or there's
Yep.
one now where you put this giant elastic band behind the horse's hind legs, trying to force the hind legs to go deeper, but they're still trying to push the horse to go too fast. And I go, it just makes no mechanical sense whatsoever. And anytime you're trying to force a body into a visual frame,
Mm-hmm.
I go, you have no idea how that complex internal coordination is actually responding to the restrictions that you're creating. So I go, balance is
Yeah. It's
like,
asking for the move when the unit's not ready to do it, you know.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Not
so,
coordinated enough to achieve that.
yeah. And I
If
go,
yeah.
the back muscles or the tight spots on our horse that our massage therapist can tell us about, right? The massage therapist or the body worker can help release some patterns of chronic tension, but only at the halt. As soon as the body's back in motion, if the coordination of the skeleton is not changed, then those same muscles are going to do the same job. And they're going to prevent the horse from falling over or prevent us from falling
Mhm.
off. And that's why they get tight. So I go, you can't get suppleness without straightness and impulsion. I just, ugh.
I, I get
So,
it.
yeah.
I get it.
And so if I'm going in this rigid order that I need rhythm, suppleness, contact, and then impulsion, and then straightness, I go, no wonder so many horses are not quite getting really authentically, mechanically good movement,
Mhm.
right? Everybody's getting the same movement.
You're
So that's
right.
why
I
it's
agree with that.
perpetuated. Everybody gets the same movement.
And they're awarding it
Yeah.
in the
So
dressage competitions.
because it all looks the same, so it must be right.
Yeah.
And I thought when I first watched Charlotte Dujardin when she rode at the London Olympics, and I watched her freestyle ride, I thought she's either going to come in first or last because she looked so different from all the other
Ah.
competitive riders. And actually, that whole British team looked really different from all the other dressage teams that year. And I was so happy she came in first because it was a huge step towards more mechanically sound movement than what we had been seeing in the dressage ring prior to that. But this persistence of following the German training scales is just not maybe never going to change in my lifetime. It's pretty ingrained. So so let's move on to contact because the definition on the dressage websites was mostly with acceptance of the bit through acceptance of the aids. So in other words, to me, that's backwards.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it backwards to you? Because you went, "Oh," head scratch.
Like you said, you're looking for something external to create the internal instead of vice versa.
Yeah, or to me, the aids are a resistance to what we don't want.
Yeah, it's like not that, not that, not that. Oh yeah, you're getting warmer.
Yeah, where a contact is a transmission of information that's
Mhm.
two-way. It's just a touch. It's neutral. It isn't
But I
telling.
don't think people perceive or use that word as we do. That's the confusion.
Yeah. Well, and one of the biggest things you and I both work with all the time is people taking a rain contact.
Taking is a good word
And that's
instead of
how it,
receiving. Mm-hmm.
yes.
Yep, big deal.
And so what we both see over and over is as soon as the words contact, especially rain contact, are introduced,
Mm-hmm.
because I often have to remind people, you always have a seat contact. And if you're straddling the horse, you always have a leg contact. But we don't think of rain contact the same way because we can sort of
Right.
more easily understand that our seat can be neutral or active, which would be active would be an aid and neutral would be a contact. And our
And if you think
legs,
about it, we've become very dewy with our hands, with having all of the devices we have. I mean, our dexterity skills are over the top.
yeah.
Instead of it being a communication, it's a control thing.
Mm.
Yeah.
And part of
And
that, I think, is our instinct of our,
oh yeah,
our little
our
monkey
grabbing
paws,
in, yeah, to
our
balance. If we,
opposable thumb.
yeah. Oh, that's a whole nother ball game right there.
Yeah, yes. So if we consider a contact is sort of a listening mode,
That would be nice.
and an aid is a talking mode.
Hmm.
When we pick up the reins, if we're creating restriction to the horse's head and neck, then we're creating resistance to our horse's weight on the bit,
Hmm.
then we're talking. It's only in the moments that it's neutral that we're listening. But I
We
go,
talk a lot with
we
our
talk a
hands.
lot.
Lot.
Yes. Yes. We're like a bad boss with our hands.
Yeah.
No, 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 no. And by the way, no. Yeah. No, 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 no. And if
Like
you,
where you said it needs to be a listening device.
the reins are a listening device, and it's kind of a two-way transmitter that is actually at the end. It's sort of like where we sit on the horse's body. If you think of from head to tail as like a long horizontal plank, we sort of sit in the middle of that teeter-totter near the fulcrum,
Hmm.
and our reins are attached to the end of the teeter-totter. So a very small movement near the fulcrum is going to be greatly exaggerated out there on the outer end of the plank. So a rein contact can actually help us become more sensitive to what's going on at the fulcrum
Hmm.
rather than trying to control the end of the plank, hoping to change the fulcrum. And that's the way we think about it. So if we drive the horse energetically forward into the bit, then the bit and the contact becomes the braking mechanism rather
Hmm.
than the phase of the hind leg stride or the back
Sorry.
muscles. It's only going to be available on YouTube. Um,
Yeah.
the
Sorry.
the phase of the hind, like we by not balancing the braking and pushing phases of every stride and
Hmm.
developing a rhythm that way, then the contact becomes the brakes.
Right.
Because now we've asked our horse to go faster than they can manage their own body weight because we want energetic as fast speed. And then the horse can't control their body weight. So then our contact becomes the braking mechanism. So our horse has no self-carriage, no ability to be agile because all that energy of pushing forward has to go into the rider's hands in order to be
Yep.
managed.
Not my cup of tea.
No, and I think the propensity of neck arthritis in
Mm,
horses and
big
neck
deal.
restrictions, neck nerve impingements in the neck, issues with the shoulders or the front legs is all the result of that way of thinking,
Hmm.
right? Because the horse's neck is pretty bendy. It can adapt to a lot of pressure.
It's kind of like ours. We can use our neck poorly.
Yes.
or
Yes.
tense it or what. I mean, the availability is there, but if you don't have the availability even in motion, then there's a contraction, which is not using it properly.
Yeah. And to drive a horse energetically into the bit is basically saying the horse doesn't have to have an internal control, an internal strong braking mechanism to regulate their own movement. We're going to do that with leverage on the mouth,
Yep.
right?
Leverage
And
and push. Yep.
yeah, it would be like if we couldn't stop ourselves and somebody had to grab us by the head every time we needed to slow down or stop. We would have a very weak body to
Yep.
be dependent on that. So mixing up contact with aids, I think, is a rein contact with a rein aid is a huge problem.
Huge.
Yeah. And a horse dropping the pole, over bending the neck, or getting really heavy on the bit, all of those things tell us that the horse's own internal braking mechanism is not doing the job.
It's not working.
So the weight's on the forehand.
Yep.
Period. End of story. Right. And so the real issue is if we can't have a neutral contact and the horse can stabilize the neck and head, then we need more impulsion, which is next on the list after contact according to the training scales. Right. So the definition I found for impulsion was increased energy and thrust. So now we want the horse to go faster and have longer strides and more power. And I go, impulsion is controlled forward energy.
That's what I thought. To me, the impulsion should be more forward and up,
Yes,
not forward.
right. It's a conversion of forward
Right.
force into upward force
Yes.
that prevents the horse from overloading their own front legs with
Hmm.
their own body weight. So that conversion is done through the back muscles
Right.
themselves. As the
And if the
spine,
horse is an extension, he can't do it. He just can't.
right, because
Yeah.
if the spine is pushing down, then the pelvis is rotated backwards. You have excessive pushing phase of the hind leg
Yep.
compared to the braking phase. And so then the horse has to stabilize on the front end or has no control.
And
And
then
if
there's the contact is a brake.
the contact either becomes the brakes or the horse evades the pressure of the bit by contorting the neck,
That's true.
right? Or the horse constantly goes too fast because the bit has become the braking mechanism, or the horse refuses to go forward.
Forward at all.
Yeah. And what I find is one of the number one problems, ironically, in with people who are competing in dressage is that these horses are losing forward. I would say that's one of the number one issues when I'm working with dressage riders is that the horse isn't forward enough. And I go, that's the direct result of pushing the horse to go faster than they can manage their own body weight with that idea that rhythm equals fast speed. And I go, rhythm equals regularity of movement that has nothing to do with miles
That's true.
per hour.
Exactly.
Hmm. So even looking at impulsion as more increase of speed and power, I go, some of the power, the agility part of power to turn quicker to the next big fence or to turn as fast as a cow can move, you have to have agility, which is related to a strong braking mechanism in the horse. To have fast speed, you, yes, have to have fast, you have to have a strong pushing mechanism or a good accelerator. But if it exceeds the braking capacity, then you weaken not only the braking, but also the pushing. You don't get as much traction with each push, so you get less power.
Yep.
So impulsion
Lots.
to me is increasing the power and the strength of both the braking and the pushing mechanisms. So you have more control over the forward motion, which to me gives me the ability to adjust speed and stride length. And for some horses, I can't even begin to get a rhythm or suppleness until I at least equalize the braking and
Yeah,
pushing use
I
of the
completely agree.
hindquarter, which is kind of technically impulsion. I have to equalize braking and pushing and get a minimal degree of engagement and impulsion before that horse could even come out of dropping the back.
Yeah,
So to put it that far up on the list makes impulsion sound like it's an advanced skill of the horse. And same with straightness. And I go, impulsion and straightness to me are primary
yeah.
internal coordinations
Internal cord. Yep. I was just
that
going to
you
say that.
need as the basis in order to get rhythm and suppleness and contact. So it's like I have to move those last two items behind the first two items if we're talking internal.
Yeah.
Now, in a competition, impulsion might be measured by how well you execute, say, pirouettes or lead changes or half passes or something like that, because those more complicated maneuvers do require more impulsion. So the external performance of those upper level maneuvers does require increased impulsion. So then I would put it externally back at the top of the list. And so that's why my first question to anybody who follows the training scales is, are you talking internal coordination or are you talking external performance? And if
Right.
you only ever train for what you see, right? You actually, I can't tell you how many horse sales I've looked at where it says horse is perfect up to third level. And the owner is buying a new horse to go beyond third level and trying to sell their horse to somebody who's just beginning the dressage levels. And I go, because if you train your horse that way up to third level, the horse isn't athletically prepared for fourth level and
Right.
beyond. And so that's what you see all the time. Our horses that have done well up through third level are now for sale because the rider wants to go higher in the levels of dressage, but the horse is not athletically prepared to do that. And the horse or the rider gets the blame.
Right.
I go, oh, it's the horse's
Not this horse.
conformation.
Yeah.
It's
It's
the
not this
horse's,
horse.
yeah. This horse is not
This horse
capable.
can't do it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And ironically, I never tell people I do dressage, but rehab work is really the essence of dressage. That's why I
Like
go,
of balance. Yeah.
you have, because you're supposed to be gymnasticizing the horse, improving the movement, developing the essential skills of healthy movement. So in that way, it is dressage. But if we're taking
What
an
dressage
in,
is supposed to be.
yeah, but if we're taking an internal perspective and we're really looking at these training scale words the way they're just words and looking at
There.
different definitions or different perspectives, then the work I do looks nothing like a competitive dressage ring.
Thank goodness.
And I think people who don't understand what good movement really feels like are trying to fill in the gap with what it looks like.
And we've become way too visual of a society and have forgotten about the internal kinematics of how everything should work.
Yeah. And the difference in the ride is night and day.
Mhm.
I go, a horse moving in balance is so easy to ride. It's a pleasure, and there's no other feeling like it. But a horse that's compensating, which the human eye, horses are masters at compensation because
Right.
deviant movement attracts the eye of a predator. So if we can see lameness or we can see bad movement, then the horse is pretty bad off because they can't mask it anymore. But most horses will give us what we're looking for at the expense of sound mechanical coordination. So if we go off of what it looks like, and then the ride is not easy, we go, oh, the horse is a big mover. The horse has a bad trot. The horse has bad conformation. A horse that's hard to ride is out of good mechanical coordination.
Exactly.
It's a bumpy ride, hard to sit the trot, hard to control the canter. All of that just means you have balance issues. But it was an eye opener to, and I'm not even going to talk about collection because that I think just got added on. But if we actually, even if you're a competitive dressage rider out there, look up the definition of each word and go, what does that mean? Because there's a modern fashion of what that means in today's competitive dressage ring. But I go, if you train to make your horse look competitive without understanding what those words really mean as a function of movement or balance, and if you're not willing to work on each one out of order, I go, whoa, that's like a mind-blowing thought for some riders, is that we might be starting with straightness in order to find that horse's rhythm. We might be working backwards from the tip to the base rather than from the base to the tip of the pyramid. And that makes people think they're doing something wrong.
True.
But bodies are not that predictable.
No.
No, and I know you weren't as familiar with the training scales, but what were sort of your biggest takeaways when you did do a little bit of research on it?
And for me, this is always a big thing. It's the language and the words and how they're used, how they're implemented. Because my body of knowledge and coming and reading the information, I'm going to see it. It didn't come across the same as what I'm seeing out there. So there was, because both of us think of it being an internal thing, not an external thing. But, we live in that world that it's about what you see and
So
sometimes not about how you get there.
if I interpret what you're saying very politely,
Okay. I like that.
what you saw out there looked like crap from your perspective. What was looking good,
It's sad. It hurts my heart.
yeah,
It hurts my heart
yeah,
because these beings, they're trying so hard for us,
yeah.
and I just feel we're sometimes not putting them first.
No, and my particular interest in the world of rehab was trying to get it right and trying to give back to horses because it's the same for me. When I look at how these training scales are often interpreted in American competitive dressage, even in American versions of classical training, which isn't, it's true in Europe too. I'm not saying the Europeans are doing a whole lot better, but our mishmash of European schools and understandings really puts out movement that's winning, that's hard for me to watch, knowing mechanically what's going on, and that it will take years for the horse to break down. So you don't get an immediate issue. The horse will cope. And I think we breed better and better horses, more athletic horses. But our riding is not getting much better. Our interpretation of what these
Our
classical,
adaptability, yeah.
yeah, the classical context, what that means can be interpreted a lot of different ways. So if nothing else, I hope if you're a dressage rider that this particular podcast maybe just gives you permission to take those words in the German classical training scale, write them down on paper, put them on the table, and mix them up. Each one is its own thing, and you can look at it through an internal lens or an external performance lens. Internal coordination versus external performance. ultimately the two will overlap. And what I find is if I first focus on the internal coordination, the performance falls in my lap like ripe
Right.
fruit. It just falls off the tree. But going strictly for what it looks like as the external performance, especially with young horses or horses that are struggling, I go, that's like picking fruit off the tree while it's green and expecting it's going to taste good. It just isn't going to happen.
I
So,
agree.
anything else you want to add?
Nope.
All
That
right.
was an eye opener.
Thanks for joining us, you guys. And I hope this just opens your mind a little bit to look at the meaning behind the words and how your horse is developing that quality. I never disagree with the objective of gaining these qualities of rhythm, suppleness, contact, impulsion, straightness, and even collection. I think that's the ultimate goal for all of us. But how we get there is either constructive, developing our horse to be stronger, more agile, more athletic, and more sound, or destructive because we're pushing the horse into our understanding without understanding what that's doing to our horse.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We look forward to seeing you on the next Horse Geeks podcast.
Take care. Bye.
All right. Bye.